I don't think we have the chance to have a humanitarian ceasefire as we wanted globally. But there is a number of proposals that were made, and we are waiting for an answer from the Russian Federation in relation to those proposals, including different mechanisms for local ceasefires, for corridors, for humanitarian assistance, evacuations, and different other aspects that can minimize the dramatic impact on civilians that we are witnessing. And I believe that you mentioned a statement in which it was said that the peace negotiations were dead. I would remind you that we are in an Easter period, and the Easter period is about resurrection.
Ibtisam Azam.
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azam from Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have two questions. First to the Secretary General. You have been sounding the alarm a lot of times about different issues, the ones you talked today about, and there is a lot of promises that world leaders are saying, but they are not delivering. So my question to you, what's your plan B to put more pressure on these world leaders? And my question to Ms. Greenspan is about trade and women empowerment, and if you, to what extent are influential countries committed to empowering women in trade, given the fact that trade is extremely important also to the issues you talked about? Thank you.
Plan B is never to give up on the plan A, because nothing can replace the political will that is needed for these decisions to be taken. We can say what is needed, the resources are available, we need political decisions. So the plan B is to insist on the plan A for these political decisions to be taken by those that have the capacity to do it.
Thank you. Michelle Nichols?
No, there is a question.
I'm sorry, Rebecca, I apologize.
Yeah, women in trade, very important. Yes, we are really working very hard with women traders and the empowerment of women, especially in e-trade. Yes, and for them, it's very important not to have restrictions because the restrictions hurt women the most. They cannot, really find any other ways and means, for the earnings of their families. So you are right. Even in the crisis, we have to insist in trade and women empowerment in trade.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you for the briefing. First of all, a question on the report. Were sanctions that have been imposed in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, were they taken into consideration when pulling together this report? And Secretary General, could you just clarify what you told us about the UN push for a humanitarian ceasefire? You're saying that you don't see a possibility at the moment for a humanitarian ceasefire in Ukraine. And what are the suggestions you have made to Russia? And if you could get President Putin on the phone, what would you say to him?
You have a question first.
On that? Well, we have taken into account all the facts. It's very difficult to be able to say what is what. What we have put together is objectively what are the impacts and the exposures from all what is happening because of the war in Ukraine. So everything is being taken into account because the figures reflect the objective impacts that they are having everywhere.
Well, a global ceasefire at the present moment doesn't seem to be possible. But there are lots of things that can be done in order to guarantee evacuation of civilians from areas of fighting, in order of guaranteeing humanitarian access in a reliable situation. And we also proposed the creation of a mechanism involving the Russian Federation, the Ukraine, and the UN, and eventually other humanitarian entities, in order to have a cell to permanently together manage and avoid incidents in these kind of situations. We have had a number of moments in which it was said that there was a local ceasefire and that things would happen, and then things did not happen. And then everybody accuses everybody of everything. Instead of this, what we need is to bring the parties together and to manage together situations like this, to make sure that we have adequate evacuations, to make sure that we have adequate humanitarian access to the populations in need.
Thank you.
The Putin. I mean, the most important message is that we need to silence the guns and we need to have a serious negotiation to achieve peace.
You said a global ceasefire.
Sorry?
You referenced a global ceasefire. Do you mean a ceasefire in Ukraine is not possible?
At the present moment, a global ceasefire
In Ukraine.
in Ukraine doesn't seem possible. That was our appeal for humanitarian reasons, but it doesn't seem possible.
Betul Anadolu.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General. Betul Yürük. With Western nations supporting Ukraine and China taking side with Russia, do you think the world is going into another Cold War? And how do you think this war will reshape the future of the international order? Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure that things are exactly as you described, but I would say that at the present moment, I want everybody united in relation to support the people in need. We'll talk about the international order afterwards. Now, we have people in desperate need in many parts of the world. They are not interested in knowing what is the future of multilateralism. They are interested in having the financial support and the support in relation to the food and energy crisis that they require. Afterwards, there will be a very interesting and important discussion, and I think our common agenda is about it, how we can strengthen multilateralism and avoid the kind of divisions that you mentioned.
Sherwin Bryce Pease, South African Broadcasting.
Thanks, Steph. Thank you, SG. Ms. Greenspan, my question is going to be for the Deputy Secretary General, who hasn't said a word during this briefing. DSG, let's talk particularly about sub-Saharan Africa, a region you are very familiar with. What are the implications of this report if they are not implemented in terms of these recommendations? What are the implications for a region where the SG has talked about coups being back, you have staggeringly high youth unemployment, political instability, where it's very easy to break the camel's back? What are the risks here for Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular?
Thank you, Sherwin, for reminding me I kept quiet for once. Now, this is very serious for sub-Saharan Africa, and given the context that we see there, it's more than just the conflicts, it's also the climate crisis. So this multitude of crises that are happening in the region, this report gives us, again, the solutions to acting now with the instruments that we have. Otherwise, there will be even more instability. There will be even more crisis as we see it, and that crisis will go beyond borders. So for us, when you hear Rebecca talking about the 69 that are severe, all three, you know, this is what sub-Saharan Africa will be prone to. But right now, we have the countries that are just one crisis. We need to prevent that one from becoming the three on food and energy and on the financing. So solutions here. There are immediate meetings where actions can be taken. The SG's Champions Group are voices of leaders who can convince their colleagues to take these actions where they can. And for us, it's about making sure those recommendations are practical, they're doable, and they are taken with a sense of urgency, lest you know, what the fallout of this becomes one of several you know, billion people. It's over 1 billion in Africa, but it will go beyond the borders.
Thank you. Greg, sorry.
If I may, with severe or significant exposure to this crisis, I'm talking about the most dramatically impacted countries. We have 25 countries in Africa. Now, the risks for the African continent and for peace and stability in the African continent, beyond the risks for hunger and poverty of the African people, are now extraordinarily expanded. And we have, of course, a particular concern about Africa, in which the Deputy Secretary General has been leading. We have a process of developing a comprehensive strategy for the African continent more in general, but in relation to this crisis, Africa is particularly targeted.
Gregory, TASS News Agency.
Thank you very much. Secretary General, I'm wondering, given the fact that the World Food Programme has warned about hunger on 2020 and the last year, why is group is creating only right now? And some experts consider this current food and energy crisis as a result of lack of investment in traditional source of energy. And so, given these facts, what do you think how the pace and methods of how this current crisis can affect on the pace and methods on the climate change response?
In relation to your first question, since if you look at the report, you see that the prices of food and the prices of energy have been climbing. What we have now is an acceleration. If you look at page 1 of the report, you see that for an index 100 of the FAO food price index in 2019, we came to the end of 2021 with an index of 130. So food prices were already climbing. And we came now to an index of 160. There is a clear acceleration. So obviously the food and energy prices were already on the rise. We had inflation already on the rise. What we have now is a dramatic impact of acceleration. Now, I think there was a lack of investment, but in renewable energy. If we had invested much more seriously in the last 10, 20 years in renewable energy, we would not be dependent on the permanent fluctuations in the markets in relation to fossil fuels. The fact that countries have not enough renewable energy, which is based on self-reliance, makes them much more dependent on markets, and markets that have always been extremely volatile. And so my answer is there has been indeed a lack of investment in the recent decades, but mostly, I believe, lack of investment in renewable energies. And there were many interests that, of course, were opposing that investment, and that is probably the reason why it has been so slow. And that is the reason why now we see countries rushing to understand that we need a world much less dependent on resources that cannot be replaced. I mean, that one day will be exhausted.
Falk, CBS News.
Thank you so much. So a follow-up for DSG Mohammed from Sherwin's question. You mentioned world leaders. Who's on board with this? I mean, in terms of the grand assistance, we've seen numbers, but how much is that coming? How much are people actually paying their pledges? And then to the two SGs, and maybe you can answer this too. How much are the IFIs on board? I've gotten through most of the report, and you say the IMF, the World Bank, are they signed on? And has there been any consideration of alternate currencies, cryptocurrencies, things like that? Just curious. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, you can see from the voices that we have of those in support from the 6 world leaders that the SGs talked about, and having the presidency of the G20 is not a small leadership involved in that. Right now, what we're seeing is that the resources are not going towards stemming the tide of this crisis, and that's what we need to see, that it does. We don't see ODA go into military expenditure, but that we see that it's additional if it's to protect lives, and that we need, to keep the ODA, to keep the foreign direct investment, to keep all the tools that we have existing that Rebecca has talked about in play. Let's see what happens in the spring meetings, because the spring meetings are an important signal as to whether this crisis is going to be taken seriously or not. It's doable. It is immediate. And it will send the signals of the engagement and the traction for wanting to avoid a global crisis, and that's what we're trying to do right now.
No, we are obviously in permanent consultation with the IMF and World Bank, but the IMF and World Bank people, like the UN Secretariat, they depend. The UN Secretariat depends on the Security Council and the General Assembly, and the IMF leaders depend on their boards. And what we need now is the boards of the institutions, and in general, those that have power to act, allowing for instruments that are available. We are not suggesting anything new. We are only suggesting that instruments that are available to be effectively put in action.
Can I also just add that it's not just the IMF and the World Bank. We also have the heads of all the regional development banks, and this is important because this is going to happen in every region and country in the world. And so having them on board as well has been very helpful, and they have been working with Rebecca in the task team.
Mario Villar, FA.
Oh, crypto?
Sorry. Yeah. Mario Villar, FA.
Mario Villar, Agencia EFE. A question on energy, perhaps for Ms. Greenspan. In the recommendations of the report, you support targeted relief for people that can't afford fuel right now, given the high prices, but you ask that this support isn't allocated universally, which is what some countries are doing right now. For example, in Western Europe, reducing the price of gasoline for consumers. Can you elaborate on why this is a bad idea?
Yeah. We understand that people need support right now, but we would like the support to be targeted and not universal subsidies to fossil fuels, because they are very difficult to then take away, and they will preclude to really accelerate the transition towards renewable energy and new and clean forms of energy. So we already have many experiences on this. Yes, we know what universal subsidies do. And we know also how effective can be when you have a good system that is designed to help the people that needs to have access to energy. That is a much better way to do it right now.
And if I may, this impact, the report is targeted at developing countries. And some countries, some developed countries, have fiscal space to do whatever they want. But there are many developing countries that simply have no fiscal space to use universal instruments, and that need to be able to use the very narrow fiscal space to support the most vulnerable people. So I think it's important to see that there are completely different perspectives. I was Prime Minister of a country, and I know what it is to act when there is fiscal space and what it is to act when there is no fiscal space. It's completely different.
Linda Fasulo, NPR.
This question is for Mr. Secretary General. You discussed the severe food crisis around the world, particularly in the poor countries. I was wondering if the UN has a policy in terms of purchasing food and energy from Russia to provide humanitarian aid to the poor countries. And also, since the UN is a great proponent of targeted sanctions, I mean, at least when, of course, there are UN sanctions, do you have a view, or I don't know what the status is, in terms of the Russian people, in terms of Russia being able to buy humanitarian supplies, whether it's medical supplies or anything else?
Of course, we are concerned with the needs of vulnerable people everywhere. And in relation to the procurement policy of the World Food Programme, the procurement policy of the World Food Programme is based on its rules, and it is done. We all recognize that it is done in the best possible way. Unfortunately, the World Food Programme was buying 50% of its food from the Ukraine, and there is no way you can take those 50% out of the Ukraine at the present moment.
Linda Fasulo. Celia Levine. Yeah.
Mr. Secretary General, what do you say to, you talked about Africa earlier, what do you say to African countries that are saying the war in Ukraine is not our war, but we are going to pay a high price?
We say to them that the war in Ukraine affects everybody, so it's also their war. But I have to say that I understand the grievances of those that in many moments felt there was no international solidarity with them. So the best way is simultaneously to make developed world understand that it's important to support developing world in times in need, for developing world also to be able to assume that a situation like the war in Ukraine is also their situation.
Last question, Philippe AFP.
Which is, we need global solidarity in all directions.
Thank you. Question from Mr. Guterres. Do you see genocide ongoing in Ukraine?
Well, genocide is strictly defined in international law. And for the UN, we rely on final legal determination by appropriate judicial bodies. So we are deeply concerned with violations of human rights. I've been saying it time and time again. We are deeply concerned with the dramatic impact of the conflict in this regard. But we leave the definition of whether there is or not a situation of genocide to the judicial bodies that are relevant in this regard. And by the way, there is an investigation of the International Criminal Court taking place in the Ukraine at the present moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.